Hi, everyone. Welcome to our November webinar on SWOTing business development opportunities. Our speaker today is Katie Kyler, so welcome, Katie. Katie Kyler is a public services librarian at the University of Alberta, where she specializes in government information and law. Katie serves on numerous government information task forces, including CGI, DPN, ALA's GODORT, and the DSP-AC. Prior to her appointment at the University of Alberta, she practiced competitive intelligence as an intelligence strategist at Bennett Jones LLP. She has also held numerous board positions in SLA's Competitive Intelligence Division and Toronto chapter, and is currently serving on the Conference Planning Committee for CAL's 2019 conference. Katie holds an Honours Bachelor of Art with a specialization in political science from the University of Toronto and a Master's of Information also from the University of Toronto. Thank you so much for volunteering your time today, Katie, and I will pass things over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much for that introduction. I guess I'll just dive right in. As you can see, I'm going to be talking about SWOTing business development opportunities. Just want to start off by saying that really I've put this presentation together based on my own experiences and the information that I've used and how I found it useful. So I hope that that's useful to everybody listening. And like it says in the Q&A chat box on the side there, please feel free if you have questions. I'm happy to stop and talk more, elaborate more on anything or anything like that as we go along, or we can have questions at the end. I'm just really flexible with that. Okay, great. Okay, so this is kind of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to be using sort of a SWOT framework to talk about how to present this information. And I'm focusing on publicly available sources. The reason that I chose to do that is, it's easy, it's accessible for everybody. It doesn't matter what databases and everything that you have access to. But because we're talking about publicly available sources, some of the opportunities or prospects that, conclusions that you can draw based on the information you can find, there's really no guarantee that these are going to be good prospects because they're so widely known. But that being said, because they're so widely known, if you're creating a report for a lawyer or something, it's the kind of thing that they really need to be aware of. It would be pretty embarrassing if this was widely accepted public knowledge and they didn't know about it. So that's why I think it's important to cover those sources. Right. So yeah, this is what we're going to go through. These are the sources, and I'll talk just a little bit about kind of like tips and best practices that I found for how to put this all together in terms of deliverables. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about this in terms of a SWOT framework. I always find it's useful for me personally to have a framework in my mind so that I can be clear about what information that I'm gathering and how I'm presenting it, because I'm sure we all know once you start doing research, you can kind of go on forever and then there can never be an end, or you can kind of lose focus. So I find having a framework in mind before you begin is really, really useful. And I really like the SWOT framework because it's forward-looking and it's client-focused. It's also pretty simple, straightforward to understand. And it separates the internal factors from the external factors, which conceptually I find that's really useful difference to make in your mind. And also it's such a common framework that most businesses will be kind of assessing themselves this way. So for that reason, it's also good to kind of take on the client's perspective as much as you can, because that's kind of the feedback that we see that clients really want, is they want a lawyer, that understands their business. So trying to take their perspective is a really useful way to do that. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about company websites, annual reports, government disclosure, news and social media, and then human intelligence. So the reason that I picked these four and then the human intelligence is because, well, these are the ones that I most commonly have used, but also two of these, the company websites and the annual reports, give kind of the client's perspective. They are created by the client or the target or whatever. And it's putting out the information as they wish to put it out there. So it's one perspective. And then the government disclosure and news and social media gives a different, more external perspective. And so those will really balance out well together. Okay. So for the most part, company websites are usually pretty standard. They all usually present the same things. They always have that About Me section. If they're a publicly traded company, they'll always have that investor section that's got all of the filings and reports and all of that kind of stuff, and they always all have a news and announcement section. In terms of doing SWOT analysis, most of the information on the company website is not the most useful. A lot of it is pretty much background information. Like if you're putting together a quick dossier and you need a short paragraph description of what the company does to start that, you can find that here and all of that. But in terms of actually kind of assessing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of a specific target, the thing you really want to look at is obviously the annual reports, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but the news and announcements are the really useful part, and then the others that will be the things that are kind of different. So not necessarily the about stuff, but in the example that I've put up here is CAN4. So this is the example I'm going to use all the way through this presentation. I'm just going to go through and gather all the information just on this one target. There, if people aren't familiar, they're, as you can see, like a lumber and pulp forestry kind of company, and they are a publicly traded company. So for them, oh, my thing is not working. Oh, there you go. So for them, the most useful thing on that website specifically, and it'll be kind of different for each target, but it is pretty obvious once you start to look whether there's going to be something useful. But I would say for this one, the responsibility section is the most useful because this one is being generated probably out of the like regulations that this company has to follow, but then this is how they're kind of like marketing it and putting it out there. So when you're looking at information created by the company on, for example, their website, obviously, you have to kind of think of the bigger picture, like, why are they putting this information, because it's probably regulation required that they have environmental policies, sustainability, forest management, that kind of stuff. And also this is, the way they're kind of marketing themselves. So when you look at, obviously, this information, you kind of have to take it with that in mind and piece out the useful insights that could be there in and amongst all of the rose-colored kind of marketing glasses that are going to get put on it. But yeah, so for this one, I still think that's something really important to look at, because this will tell you, what are their regulatory responsibilities? What are they having to report publicly on, or they feel required for social capital purposes to put that out there in their image? Because these are important things that they see as, the company obviously sees as important, and so that's something that you need to then translate into a report that you would give to, your lawyer or whoever is asking about this specific client. So what that would look like is, so for example, we looked at that responsibility question. If we look into a SWOT framework, these are the kinds of conclusions that I would draw from that, And it's important, I like this example because you can clearly see that this regulatory responsibility can be both an opportunity and a threat. And I think it's useful in order to put that sort of marketing spin on it, as in marketing from your lawyer going to see a prospective client perspective. Because if you use that kind of marketing mindset in the report, like you say to the lawyer that you're presenting this to, like, they have all this regulatory responsibility, and that could be, an opportunity for them. They may have the opportunity for new partnerships, the way they market themselves, their corporate social responsibility, research and development, or alternatively, that it could be a threat, that's something that they need, advice on about potential litigation or costs, or just like government relations, dealing with regulations, that kind of thing. Then it saves the time of the lawyer that you're, say, giving it to, because then they can easily have their own talking points, and you've just put that all together based on that information. Yeah, so for this one, you can see that's the kind of way that I would set it up and present it. These are the types of opportunities that you can glean from that information. And I think in terms of publicly available information, for the most part, in terms of opportunities, the website is probably the least useful, but also it's the place that everyone will check. So you really need to make sure that you have those bases covered. So that's why that's included. Okay, so next, for the second kind of internally by the company or target created information, is annual reports and filings. So annual reports especially, I find the most useful, and because they're mandated, essentially, the sections that they have to cover and the information that needs to be included. For you, when you're doing the research and when you're looking into this stuff, it makes it really easy, because you can just quickly figure out, once you've looked at a million of these, it's just like, these are the sections that I always go to, skim through for, other relevant things. But for the most part, like boom, 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 it's all nice and laid out. So the most useful sections, as I put in here, are, like you want to get the highlights, new projects, future plans. That's where you're going to get those positive strengths and opportunities. And then there'll always be a section on risks, which I find is really a gold mine of opportunities, prospective opportunities for usually the lawyers that you're creating these reports for. And then legal issues and stuff will be included in there that are, hit and miss. Every report is a little bit different, but for the most part, this is always included. And you can, I'm sure everyone knows this, but they're usually on the company website. They're definitely on CDAR if they're not. So they're really easy to find. You don't need to have any special subscriptions or anything for these. Okay. So again, with this, the same as with the company websites, obviously these are created by the company. So they're going to put, their own kind of spin on it, and you have to kind of read between the lines. But I find the easiest thing to do is to pay attention to new things that have changed, like new projects, initiatives, future plans, that kind of stuff. And because these reports are usually quite dense, sometimes they're hundreds of pages. It's a lot. Like, reading through it is just not practical, and nobody really has the time to do that. So paying attention to, like I said, the new projects, unless you're a financial expert or it's requested that you do some sort of financial analysis, for the most part, I wouldn't even look at all of the charts and all of that stuff with the financial statements. But the things like the highlights, new projects, future plans, those are places where there can be opportunities. Chances are, for example, if they're going to put in a deal that they're about to do, or in this case, I don't know, if they're going to open a new pulp plant or something like that, chances are they probably already have counsel on that because they've put it in here. But you know, maybe you'll get lucky and they don't, but for the most part, it's still something that you should know about, and then you can research into it further if, you know, if that lawyer, for example, ends up working on a later deal. It'll be good to know that this deal happened before, and you can look into the details of it and that type of thing. So it's useful for that kind of stuff too. So in this one, I've just pointed out that there is this new joint venture, and then you can see in here that they've mentioned that they've received grant funding for some R&D initiatives. And so, you know, that's the type of opportunity that you can put forward, right? They've received this funding. There's going to be new initiatives coming out of that. There's probably going to be a need for counsel on that type of thing in there. Okay. So that's where you would get sort of the positives in all of those new and highlights and that kind of stuff. But then the weaknesses or the, sorry, I meant to update this slide, but it's supposed to say weaknesses and threats. But anyways, risks, same kind of thing. But I find that this is really the gold mine of annual reports, is the risks and uncertainties, because, you know, from a perspective of needing legal counsel, usually it happens when there is a risk or when there is some sort of issue. That tends to be more often when companies will seek out legal counsel. So the risks for the company or the weaknesses or threats can really be some of the greatest opportunities for the, you know, lawyers or counsel to provide guidance, you know, to help solve the problems, that kind of stuff. So these are really important sections to pay attention to. So you can see a couple here. They're literally always laid out just very clearly like this. So the other thing that annual reports are really useful for are finding out about legal issues. Sometimes these things are included within the risks and, you know, uncertainties, issues, whatever they're naming that section. Essentially, it will be risks. But I find usually these things kind of get hidden, and they try to like weave it in through other stuff because they don't really want to, you know, present all their legal issues just right out there, because obviously that's, you know, kind of cannot necessarily look the best, right? And it is in some ways a marketing material, even though technically it's investor relations. But anyways, so honestly, like Control F is your best friend. You should just Control F things like legal, law, lawyer, counsel, you know, court, all of the words that you can think of, and you can find a bunch of incredibly useful little insights that can hopefully turn into prospects, business development opportunities, but also that, you know, the lawyer that's asking you for information about this specific company is obviously going to be most interested in the legal issues. So even just from my short, and this is not by any means all of them, I know it's a little small. I hope people can still kind of get the gist of what I'm trying to say here, but even just Control F-ing legal, like I've come up with quite a few really interesting bits of information that you would want to include, and it just, you know, takes no time at all. So, you know, we can see that there's legal challenges related to the softwood lumber agreement and the renegotiation of NAFTA as well. From this unallocated other items, you can see that there's been quite a few higher than expected legal issues in 2017. So, you know, that's an important thing to note. And, you know, what that could possibly mean about legal issues moving forward. This may be something that they're always having to deal with, right? And then you can also see in some of the financial statements, without having to go through them all, understand that, but you can see that there are clearly like legal settlements and things that you could look further into for more information. So those are very useful as well. So to put this back into our SWOT framework, these are just a few of the conclusions that I would draw and how I would put them together as their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So again, the strengths and weaknesses, those are internal to the client or to the company. So things like, you know, they talked about in that annual report in that highlights section that there was increased U.S. sawmill operations. And on the downside, there was, that weakness is a typo. It's supposed to be decreased production at Canadian sawmill operations. So what that's telling you is that there's been decreases in Canada, but there's been increases in America. And kind of putting that together, you can see that, you know, maybe there's opportunity for some cross-border work because there is a chance that as that's, you know, the trend that they're seeing, that they're going to be moving more business to the States and they're going to need counsel to help them with those kinds of things, right? And then on the opportunity side, there has been a sustainable technology grant that they received. So, you know, perhaps there's an opportunity for some IP work or maybe technology work. Lumber demand has increased. So, you know, that's good. There could be, you know, they could be expanding into other markets and that kind of stuff. There's potentially opportunities. You'd have to look more into that. And then threats, obviously, with like the NAFTA negotiations and softwood lumber. That's an ever-present threat, but that's probably something just to make sure that you're aware of. And there's always opportunities for working with the government, trade negotiations, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how you could use the information in a report like that and how dividing it up into these areas of the SWOT analysis can help you draw the conclusions. And it puts it together, you know, in a nice, clear package that you can easily kind of digest and present to somebody, right? Okay, so the next type of public information is government disclosure. I love government disclosure. I love all government information, but I find there is just really a wealth of information here. So a couple of the best sources that I recommend is the lobbying activity search, which I put forward here. This is an incredibly useful fountain of information because really it's going to tell you what that company, that target company views as their opportunities and as their threats, because they're going to lobby the government to try to take advantage of any opportunities as well as to minimize the impact of any threats. So it's really useful to look in there, but also you can get a ton of other useful information in here. For example, you can see that just by searching the name of this company, I've pulled up a whole bunch of lobbying registered lobbying groups. And when you click on any of these, like the BC Lumber Trade Council, which is the first one I pulled up in this little pop-up thing, you'll see a list of all of the other companies that are part of that council, that are part of that lobbying group as they've attached themselves to that specific issue that they're lobbying on. And you'll see the subject matter, so you'll see what they're lobbying on and how they have lobbied and who they've lobbied. So that's really useful information, obviously, to know. But also even just the associations that this group is part of and the other association, like the other companies that are lobbying together with them, gives you a ton of information. One, the associations give you somewhere to look for more information on that industry and potentially on how, you know, what's going on, trends in that industry that could impact the target that you're looking at. And also, when at the end we're going to talk a little bit about human intelligence, and these other companies and these associations or coalitions or anything like that are incredibly useful potential sources of human intelligence that is really the golden ticket to making this public information really useful as a like a CI kind of prospecting tool. So these are incredibly useful. I highly recommend always checking them. They also usually give counsel information, which is nice because I always found that that's something lawyers always want to know, who else is working with this client. And obviously you can see right here that that's included right up front. The consultant that represents lobbying activities is usually a lawyer. So that's very useful. The other one is just generally all government information. So, ministries and departments are an incredibly useful source. Again, they give that, or not again, but they give that external perspective, which is different from the annual reports, the filings, and the websites. So it's important to have that external perspective, but also usually this is from, the regulator perspective. In the case of CAN4, if we're looking at like Natural Resources Canada, that will regulate a lot of the forestry work that they do. So that's another important piece of the puzzle for that external opportunities and threats that we're looking at. When you're looking at government information, it's often the case that the websites are not the most user-friendly, and they are often changing, and I just find the easiest thing to do to search that is to do a site search. So like I've done here, you can see in these examples, just do a site search for, any mention of that company and, in Natural Resources Canada, because, I saw in the previous lobbying search that they've lobbied Natural Resources Canada, but also because that's the regulator of forestry in a lot of areas or in some of their activities. And then also, you can just do these site searches for the entire URL, so to speak, of the government. Obviously for Canada, you'd have to do a couple. You'd have to do the gc.ca and then the canada.ca. And you should probably do this for any jurisdictions that are related to whatever target company you're looking at. Whether obviously provincial and maybe even municipal depending on that. But yeah, this quick site search is incredibly useful. You can already see just from this basic search that there's quite a few interesting bits of information. We can see there was an award. That's always really good to know. That can be, you could view that as a strength, but also awards are really good opportunities for relationship development. You can congratulate a client or a person on their award, or, usually these awards come with grant funding for R&D development and stuff like that. So there's good opportunities there. You can see there's a Canada-China partnership. So those are interesting opportunities. And yeah, there's quite a wealth of information available through these sources. So it's definitely worth checking, not to be missed. So again, to put that kind of into that SWOT analysis, like I said, that award is a really good strength, and that's an opportunity to develop a relationship, but also potentially could lead to other opportunities. Likewise, with the China partnership, again, there's that cross-border. Maybe there's maybe they need counsel for someone who's an expert on doing business in China, with China, that kind of thing. And then like the threats, it's important to know about the issues this company is going to be dealing with, and to be able to hopefully have a solution, or, not that you would have a solution, but hopefully if you're providing this to a lawyer, then maybe they have ideas of how they could help with that, and then that just gives them, the problem that they could solve, right? Okay. So the other external to check is obviously news and social media. Again, this is an external perspective, so that's really useful. It's especially news can be very useful for providing the perspective that the company, may not want to put out there. You're not really going to get negative perceptions from government information or government disclosure, and you definitely won't get it from, annual reports, not really, or for the company website. But if there is a lot of, negative press or things going around, or really positive too, but negative especially from about a specific company, then the news and the social media piece is really where you're going to get that perspective. Also, you'll get much more recent activity, whereas with the annual report, that's something that's obviously only filed once a year. So a lot of times, it's November 2018, and the most recent report I could find for Canfor was from early in 2017. So there's a lot of time that has passed between when that report has come out and now. And, there's filings and stuff you can check to fill in that blanks, but the media is also a really useful source for that kind of thing to check out. So that's really useful. The other thing is it's really important to take with a grain of salt, obviously, what you're looking at when you look at the media. One of the tricks that I always like to say is you should always triangulate. And what I mean by that is if you find a statement, an article about an incident that happened or something like that, and you think it could be useful, it's really important to check at least 3 different sources, and then they'll have a different perspective. And somewhere between those 3 sources, there will be the closest to the kind of truth, as you could say, because obviously, we all know when we see media that there's no way to get away from the bias that's in there. So that's why it's important to check, just because you found one article that says something really terrible in like the National Post, you should probably check the Globe and, probably check maybe the Star, like something to get a more balanced perspectives between all 3. So, but that being said, they're still incredibly, incredibly useful, and that's where you'll find a lot more of the really good sort of like golden nugget insights kind of thing. So, and just Google News. It's free. It's easy. It's nice because it aggregates everything, and it can just point you to more sources that you can delve deeper into. Okay. And then social media. Again, social media provides a lot of the same advantages and types of information that you can get from the news. Granted, it does usually also include a lot of useless information and can be a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it is still worth checking. It depends on the company. Like with this example that I've used with Canfor, it's really nice because there isn't a ton of social media, for example, in this example, tweets out there about it. But if you were looking at a company like Rogers, if you just search Rogers, you're probably going to get a ton of, people unhappy with their plans and like complaints and stuff like that. And, that says something, not something that company has to deal with, but there's probably not too much opportunity for, legal work that can be gained from that type of information. So, you always have to kind of take it with that grain of salt and that kind of thing. But the other thing that I find the most useful about social media is every once in a while you get a random great tidbit that you can kind of follow through and investigate further. But because most media and associations and stuff like that are, active on social media, especially Twitter, so easy to search, it's just a really good repository to fill in the blanks of things that might have been missed in just a news search. Also, it'll give you information about kind of like stakeholders, like industry associations, or, maybe even if there's really active on Twitter, there could be executives or things like that. But it'll give you those leads to kind of follow further, like, this association was tweeting about what CanFor is doing, so, maybe I should go and check out, the other information they can provide, see if we know anybody there, that kind of thing. So it's really useful for that to kind of point you at sources that maybe you didn't automatically think of or weren't aware of, all the associations or, coalitions, whatever, that are working within a specific industry or area. So it's really useful for that. Okay. So again, to put this into that kind of SWOT framework, which I find really useful, you can see we've gotten totally different information from the media and social media. So, some of the strengths, they have put forward that they have quite a comfortable cash and liquidity in those news articles. So that's a good thing to know. And that they'll be financing acquisitions with that. Definitely there's M&A activities. They did mention also in the media that there's job cuts. So, maybe there's some need for some labor relations work. Likewise, in the threats, there was some labor action strikes that were mentioned. So that's another important thing to be aware of. And also there could be union, labor relation, administrative type of legal advice that's needed for that type of thing. And then opportunities, right? There were a few acquisitions that were mentioned and that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of things that you could draw from that. And again, I find it really useful to conceptually separate the internal strengths and weaknesses with the external opportunities and threats, because there's a different approach to solving those, and there's a different type of, maybe legal assistance that would be needed, whether it's external or internal related issue or opportunity. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the leading publicly available sources that are there for doing a SWOT analysis, the ones that I would always make sure to check, even if you just pull like a dossier, from wherever, you have your basic background information to get that fuller picture. Those are kind of the four that I would always make sure to check. But I think it's important to highlight how important it is to include human intelligence in any report that you put together, as much as you can, right? Sometimes this is the hardest piece to find, but it really is the key, I think, to all of the publicly available info. It kind of provides the context, and as well, you don't know the full picture, right, with what's being presented publicly. So it provides that full picture, and it can really point to what are, you found all this information, but where are the opportunities really? Which of these potential opportunities can you ignore? Which can you pursue? And do you have relationships, or does the firm or the lawyer or whoever have relationships that can be leveraged in order to take advantage of any of these prospective opportunities that you've gleaned through the research that you've done? So it's definitely an incredibly useful, vital, I would say, piece. And a few of the places where you can kind of get this information, you can use if you're at a firm, any internal relationship management platforms or billing software that you can find, and, checking things like, have we worked with this target before? Does anybody, and then if so, who's worked with them? Maybe tell the person that's asked you to look into this company to take a look at that. And then, or to talk to that person. So, do you have any employees or people connected specifically to that company that you or people at your firm know? And then the other industry players. So from like the lobbying search or from any of the associations, do you have contacts or clients that are in there that you could speak to that could provide, more perspective on what's going on with the industry or, with that company? Usually within industries, a lot of people have a really good idea what's going on at the related companies, right? Libraries are so much like this. We see this all the time, you know. It's kind of a small world once you break into it, so you got to find the connections where you can. So again, like industry associations and, you know, as you can see on the slide, other lawyers at the firm that have worked with that field, in that industry, or, you know, obviously with that company. So those are all really useful people to reach out to, or to make the connections, you know. If you aren't able or comfortable to do that, you can just, you know, talk to the person and say, like, these are the people you may want to talk to, and then they can make that decision for themselves as well. So just to kind of finish it up a bit, I hope I haven't talked too fast. Just some tips and tricks that I would really recommend for putting this all together into a package and providing it. It's really, really important to pay attention to style and formatting. Make sure that, you know, the best opportunities, once you've put everything together, it'll be, it should hopefully be tailored, or it should be obvious when you go through it all. But if it's not, then, you know, tailor the best opportunities to the person who's requesting, you know, like take a look at the experience that they have, you know, the type of work that they've done, the conversations that you've had, and that kind of stuff, and put that information right up front. Be consistent and clear. It's really tempting to copy and paste from, like, say, you know, the annual report. Oh, hey, look, they said this is a risk. Just copy and paste that into the report. But don't do that, because, you know, the real value that you can add is by just bringing out the salient pieces, making it as clear, concise, straightforward as possible, and honestly pay attention to formatting, because, you know, that's where you always lose people, right? If you're reading something and the formatting gets weird, that's just, you know, we all, I think, as human nature, kind of tend to stop paying attention, and yeah. Okay, so the last thing about putting it together, like I said, consider your audience. I think that the real value that we add with doing, you know, CI work for our lawyers and that kind of stuff is that kind of bespoke, tailored work, because, you know, anybody can just dump all the information. If you go through it and put the best information in the best, you know, in the simplest, shortest amount of words right up front, this is what you need to know. This is what's the most useful to you. I'm not going to bog you down with useless jargon, and tailoring that to the person that's requested it. That's just so incredibly valuable, and they'll thank you for it and come back and request more and more things because of it. So, you know, just understanding your audience. So you can do that obviously by having a reference interview, but if you don't have an opportunity to actually have a conversation, maybe your request came in just from like an email or something like that, and you really don't have much information, you can always check just the website to find out their experience, any internal databases that you have about their, you know, the clients, the type of work that they've done, their relationships, that kind of stuff, and to include that in a way that makes these opportunities, prospective opportunities that you've gleaned through all this, personal and something that they could then act on right away, right? You know, you could say, oh, we found this opportunity about this grant, and you've done work on this, and you know this person X, then they can just be like, look at that, oh, great. They can call that person up and then have that discussion, and that's just presented just like right there, right like that. So that's my recommendation for that. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have kind of prepared. So thank you for listening. If there's any questions, actually I do see there is one question right now about, it says, when searching social media, do you do so anonymously? or do you use your own Twitter handle or anything like that? So for that, I would say for things like Twitter, I just use my own because they can't really see if you've searched their Twitter because, unless you're commenting or retweeting or liking or anything like that. But for Facebook and LinkedIn, I always try, not to be shady about it. Like so that being said, I wouldn't use anything fake. I wouldn't even probably touch Facebook, to be honest with you. But with LinkedIn, in my previous experience, we had a firm LinkedIn account for the marketing department. And if I needed for some reason to access something that was on LinkedIn, like a person's profile that wasn't publicly available, then I would do it with the firm account so that they could see that. But to be honest, I try to stick to publicly available information as much as possible. So I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Katie. That was super interesting. I feel like I learned a lot from that. I think that we'll take a moment to see if there's any more questions. So if anyone has a question for Katie, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. Yeah, I think we'll just give everyone a moment in case there are any questions.
Sounds great.
Okay, well, if there are no questions right now, it's possible. Katie, would you be okay if people emailed you questions if they think of them later?
Yeah, for sure. I don't have any problem with that. My email's right there on the screen. It's just my last name at uvalberta.ca. So happy for any questions that come in later.
I know that I usually do that as well. I can't think of it on the spot, but then later I'll be like, oh yeah, I should have asked that question. So, okay, well, if there are no more questions right now, then I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thanks again, Katie, for sharing your insight with us. And as for our next webinar, we don't have one scheduled for December, but we will have one in January, so stay tuned. We'll advertise the next webinar on the call website, so keep checking back for webinars in the new year. Yeah, so thank you again, Katie, and I think we'll close the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.